Agency Cyber Risks, a proactive shift. Sponsored by Blue Coat, security makes the mission possible. And now the host, Steve O'Keefe, founder of Meratalk.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Steve O'Keefe, founder of Meratalk. Now, computer security is not geek speak anymore. Recent cybersecurity breaches have pushed cybersecurity off the electronic bulletin boards and onto the front pages of newspapers across America. And right here in Washington, D.C., Uncle Sam's cyber warriors are on the front lines every day in hand-to-hand combat with crooks and hackers. I'm afraid both inside and outside the government. But as we all know, cyber threats are mounting. So federal chief information officers and chief information security officers are changing the game. Increasingly, our cyber warriors are walking away from outdated compliance, paper-based security. They're taking new initiatives in assessing risk. As agencies embrace risk management, they're also implementing real-time cybersecurity information sharing across the government. This new approach, known as continuous monitoring, allows agencies to learn from each other to enhance America's cyber defenses. I'm excited to be joined here in the studio today by 4 leading authorities on federal cybersecurity. Simone Zickman, CIO at the Department of Commerce. Aubrey Merchant-Dest, Director of Cybersecurity Strategy at Blue Coat. Bill Ley, Deputy CIO for Information Assurance and CISO at the State Department. And Joe Klimovich, CIO at NOAA, that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Simone, could you tell us a little about the transition from compliance to risk management?
Cybersecurity was a compliance-based, heavily paper-oriented exercise where there was a lot of checklists focused on looking at what type of security controls needed to be implemented, what type of security controls actually were implemented. We're now moving towards an era of much more automated and near real-time situational awareness, where we have systems that themselves are able to verify that controls are being implemented, assess the state of security across a broad infrastructure, and report in a real-time or near real-time basis a broad security posture over a big infrastructure up to decision makers.
Aubrey, over to you. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this shift from compliance to risk management.
Well, I think with compliance, what we've been dealing with is solutions where we're able to pass audits. So we'd get a grade on whether or not our cybersecurity posture was meeting the minimum requirements for the government. Now what we're seeing is that if someone's trying to get an asset or trying to break into your network with targeted attacks, they can easily skate through perimeter defenses, potentially host defenses as well. The bottom line is that we can't stop everything. So I think with this new automated approach that CDM provides us, it is in fact going to give us a better handle on cyber situational awareness.
So a more profound understanding of whether we're secure or not.
Correct.
Thank you. Bill, over to you. CDM with John Streufert started over at the State Department. Maybe you could provide a little perspective on what's happening in that area.
Certainly. Yeah, State Department's been using continuous diagnostics and mitigation tools now probably for about 4 years. We're using it to basically look at how we patch our systems, how we secure against viruses, and give us situational awareness of how our system infrastructure looks. The big key is being able to give situational awareness to both our decision makers and our system owners, so they really know when they're making risk-based decisions what it is they're up against, whether it's introducing new technologies or if they're just trying to further the mission of the department. Things like mobile computing, wireless networks are really complicating those decisions, but with continuous diagnostics, we at least have the tools now to be able to tell our decision makers, here are the pros, here are the cons, so they can make a good factual-based, risk-based decision.
Thank you, Bill. I mean, so the point here is really that we're giving executives more power to make decisions to manage those risks. And if you could, Joe, if you could talk a little bit about what's happening at NOAA and your perspective on this.
Well, I think NIST has done a great job over the years of defining cybersecurity standards and procedures and processes. But one of the things that we're really trying to do is focus on mitigating the most important risks, the biggest risks. And to that extent, we've have a program underway to look at our critical infrastructure and identify what are the biggest risks. And one area that we've really focused on is we have a lot of systems in NOAA, is a change that we made about a year ago, where I'm the co-authorizing official for all high-impact systems. So I get a really good in-depth view of our security posture for the high-impact systems. And these are our most critical systems protecting lives and livelihoods of the nation. And so our focus on cybersecurity is to really focus on the biggest problems, where the biggest payoff is on the most critical systems.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And so looking at information on how much we were spending on paper-based compliance, I believe we were spending about a quarter of the cybersecurity budget on compliance versus managing the risks that are most important. Simone, could you talk a little bit about how you've implemented continuous monitoring, how you're planning to implement continuous monitoring at Commerce?
Sure. At the Department of Commerce, we're looking at implementing a department-wide system for continuous monitoring. And this is a big change because in the past, if I, as the department CIO, wanted to get an assessment of the big security picture across the department, it was typically a paper-based exercise, or the email equivalent of that. We would send out data calls, get information back, and by the time we got the information back, it was already outdated. By implementing this system across the entire department, we're going to have real-time information flowing to a security operations center that's going to give us an almost live view of what information looks like across the department's entire infrastructure, which is important in an organization like Commerce because we're quite federated. We have numerous bureaus or sub-agencies and many systems and infrastructures. So to be able to consolidate all of that into a holistic view and give situational awareness to people is great.
So Commerce and NOAA are obviously clearly affiliated. Aubrey, maybe you could talk about what you're seeing from a continuous monitoring perspective across agencies. You're obviously talking with a lot of CISOs at multiple agencies.
So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of advantages to the CDM and the approaches that folks are taking. I think that, protocols like SCAP, tying that in with things like Cybox and some other activities, say from MITRE, I think it will go a long way to give us, the true picture of what's happening on our network, and even being able to get down to providing attributions to attack vectors as they kind of lead up to a breach. So, folks are, taking this automated approach. I think it's, most important that they're able to really prioritize where their weaknesses are and, be able to target those systems where they'll get the biggest value.
Bill, in terms of the continuous monitoring programs of the state, maybe Bill and Joe, if you could just give us a quick soundbite in terms of what you're up to.
The last 4 years, we had a proprietary or prototypical continuous diagnostics tool. We developed it in-house, really figuring out how to tie our sensors from our automated systems into a dashboard, if you will, that gave us the situational awareness on our infrastructure that our decision makers were looking for. What we hope to do now with DHS is move that to a commercial-based platform over the next year to 18 months. With that, we'll be able to upgrade and adjust to new technologies, new threats and vulnerabilities much easier. But we're definitely in that transitionary phase right now as we go from proprietary to commercial.
And coming next, how to ensure federal cybersecurity's future. We'll be right back.
Cyber attacks pose a serious threat to federal agencies and critical infrastructure. Today's attacks are larger, more targeted, and aimed at the entire federal workforce. Don't leave your users out in the cold. Blue Coat's Lifecycle Defense presents an open architecture to help identify threats and reduce response time, all while integrating with existing security tools. Blue Coat. Security empowers federal agencies. Find out more at bluecoat.com.
Welcome back. I'm Steve O'Keefe, and you're watching Agency Cyber Risks, a Proactive Shift. Let's continue the conversation on continuous monitoring. Joe, what's happening at NOAA?
Sure. At NOAA, continuous monitoring is embedded in our enterprise-level security operations center, which we stood up in 2007 or 2010. And the center is now working 24/7. And what it's doing is taking all the system auto logs that we used to collect in the past, didn't do anything with it. It's now feeding that in from 20,000 plus devices across NOAA. And we're now analyzing over 1 billion events per day. And we're able to see things that we weren't able to see before. And we also are able to, through this operations center, block 500,000 malicious web contents or connections to websites per week. So that's 500,000 per week protection for cyber intrusions. In addition, though, to endpoint protection, we have 4 trusted internet connections that we've established. We actually have built them and run all of our traffic through these endpoints. So we're protecting the perimeter, also managing the endpoint devices.
So really we're talking about big data for cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. William, maybe you could talk a little bit more about this notion of analyzing more data to become more secure.
The challenge, as you said, it is a big data issue. Part of it is dealing with thousands of false positives on a daily basis. We have hundreds of monitors, thousands of sensors. They're all pulling data together 24/7 and trying to correlate and collaborate where we have an operational picture that actually makes sense. We can't afford to have an army of people watching all of these monitors, so we have to have really sophisticated tools to filter for us. But once the filtering is consistent, we really end up with a risk management model that gets the false positives down to a point that are manageable, and we end up with useful information that leads to better decisions.
Great. Aubrey, maybe you could talk a little bit about continuous monitoring as it allows agencies to share information. So this notion of big data is great, and agencies are getting smarter, but how are agencies sharing that information in order to become smarter across the government?
So, I mean, I think that's really one of the objectives of CDM, certainly with 1.2 and a number of protocols that they've developed to enable that information sharing. But the idea is, moving beyond simple, FISMA compliance and being able to have these systems automated to the point where they can actually feed data into a centralized sensor or collector, if you will, is going to allow them to have a better picture of what's happening across all agencies, which is something they've not had before.
Yeah, I was talking to John Streufert just the other day at DHS and PPD. Simone, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the future is for continuous monitoring.
Well, I think if you look at the overall philosophy of continuous monitoring, it encompasses a much broader scope in the context of security than what people have actually implemented today. So I think the main part of the future in continuous monitoring is to keep expanding the scope of what types of security controls, what kinds of risks are being monitored on a continuous basis or semi-real-time basis. And we're still in the early stages in relative terms of continuous monitoring. The scope and breadth of what is being assessed through these automated systems will definitely continue to grow.
Terrific. I think as we look at this notion of transparency, which is where continuous monitoring is going, we're also trying to balance how do we deal with encryption, because encryption is very important. So, Joe, maybe you could talk a little bit about this notion of how to balance the trade-off between encrypted data and transparency so we can see better.
I think in NOAA, we encrypt all of our devices. So, I mean, our endpoint devices are encrypted, but a lot of the traffic, we need to make sure that we can look at the traffic in our operations center and also at our trusted internet connection point. So it's something that we're constantly working around. And we have 400 plus facilities that we have to work against in NOAA. So we have a very decentralized footprint. And so we're trying to architect the network, and a lot more work in terms of cybersecurity has to go on in the network.
Great. William, could you talk a little bit about this balance and trade-off between encryption and transparency and continuous monitoring?
The Department of State infrastructure is a global infrastructure. We're in over 200 countries. So all our data is encrypted as it transitions boundaries. The key to having good continuous diagnostics situational awareness is being able to, on the fly, unencrypt these data packets, analyze them, and re-encrypt them. You really have to have the monitors, the sensors, and the encryptors and decryptors all synchronized, or you end up with a huge network bandwidth issue. You slow your network down to a crawl where it's no longer useful. So it can be a very delicate balance to get the trade-off right between encrypting your data in motion and being able to unencrypt it and actually see what's being contained in the data packets.
Terrific. Aubrey, to you.
There are methods utilizing SSL decryption to essentially allow you to implement specific policies on what it is that you want to decrypt. So if there's certain PII information or maybe credit card information that you don't want to have decrypted, you can just write a policy that says, if you see traffic that matches this particular schema or these particular endpoints or this particular website, don't bother to decrypt it. So, having the ability to have visibility into some traffic certainly exists, and there are tools that are available to accomplish that.
And to you, Simone, they say that the wheels of commerce are always turning. How do you balance the trade-off between continuous monitoring and the requirement to encrypt data?
Well, it varies quite a bit. I mentioned earlier Commerce is a decentralized agency, and we have numerous different bureaus within Commerce that have very different types of missions with very different types of data that they use and different sensitivity associated with that data. So, for example, weather data is something that gets transmitted very broadly once information products have been developed and actual weather predictions are being disseminated. And that type of information goes out very broadly in an open fashion. On the other hand, within Commerce, we also have the Census Bureau, and they deal with sensitive, personally identifiable information for hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in this country, and that's the kind of information that, when it's being moved, we definitely want to keep it secure. So the issue of the trade-off and how it's managed is something that is done often at the local level, because the requirements for how data needs to be protected vary significantly across different parts of commerce.
I think that brings us logically full circle in terms of the fact that it's about managing the risk, right? So when you're looking at encrypting, of course you want to encrypt the data, but it depends on what the goals are, and so if it gets in the way of the mission, then it's an issue. And so that needs to be made at the mission level.
Yep.
Thanks, gentlemen. Today's discussion has examined how agencies are shifting from compliance to risk management as cyber attacks continue to evolve. We thank our panelists for sharing their insights into federal cybersecurity, and we thank you for joining us.